There's kind of an embarrassment when you say, are you an American? I don't want to be an American. I don't want to show a US passport.
Meet Andrew Henderson, a serial entrepreneur and investor, also known as the Nomad Capitalist. Andrew shared with me what made him give up his American passport, why the US is heading in the wrong direction, and what issues Americans now face even while living abroad. I'm Max, an entrepreneur and YouTuber from Singapore. Let's dive in. How Irish in general view Americans? Are there any prejudices, any stereotypes against Americans?
What I sense over 15 years of visiting Ireland is that Americans are part of the pie. They're not quite as much of a novelty. It's not quite as interesting. And you see people from all over the world that are going to Ireland now. And so the novelty now, my Irish friends, they want to date a Brazilian because there's a lot of Brazilians. I don't know that anyone's country has been ruined by the Brazilians. And so I think that it's the same thing that you're seeing in the rest of the world. Americans are a smaller piece of the pie going outbound, and therefore they're less relevant. Americans are seen as fine. I don't know that they were ever worshipped, but what's one level below worshipped? That's not the case anymore. And I think that's the case everywhere in the world. And I think if you don't leave the United States and you don't leave the Western bubble, you have this idea that everyone's clamoring for Americans and for American money. And I don't think anybody cares anymore. I think that this idea that a lot of Americans have, and probably other Westerners, that they just show up and they get stuff. When you look at citizenship by investment, that's something that we do for clients. I mean, in most countries, 90+% are not Westerners. Those customers are not Westerners. You're welcome to participate. Like, this is true about Ireland. This is true about so many places. If you're an American, you're welcome to participate. They're not going to treat you badly, but they're not going to give you special circumstances because you are a very small percentage of the pie these days. And I think what I've seen Americans, at least from our clientele, is they realize the country is heading in the wrong direction at a much faster rate than a place like Ireland. And in Asian countries, they're heading in the right direction. So the US is very bad from a momentum perspective. And I think that when you see more Americans enter the pool, it's going to be a wake-up call.
For you as an ex-American, what's the cultural differences you see in Ireland?
I think that if you just look statistically speaking, there is more harmony. People do get along more. People aren't at each other's throats. You don't have this kind of thing where half the people are in the progressive camp and half the people are in the Trump camp. And then there's these kind of politically homeless people in the middle. I guess that wouldn't be half at each camp. But I think it's a bit more harmonious. It's certainly more, if you're not from here, more tax friendly, which the US is just terribly not tax friendly. I think that what do they say? It's a culture of trust, not a culture of enforcement. You can't say that the US is entirely a culture of enforcement when it comes to things like, did you pay what you owe? But you don't have the fear in a country like Ireland that I did in the US of, did I fill out one form incorrectly and the penalty is prison? So there's a lot more. I mean, like I had something where it listed my place of birth as St. Lucia, which is a citizenship that I have, but I wasn't born there. And when I mentioned like, hey, maybe you should fix this, they're like, who cares? In the US, like they would yell at you for their mistake. I just think that, maybe it's hard to understand if you haven't lived in both places, but I think that just generally a culture of, okay, people make mistakes. Okay, whatever. And I think people in general are a lot more, if not friendly, at least polite than you would find in a comparable U.S. city. I mean, listen, you can, obviously Dublin is going to be less friendly than somewhere in County Clare, the same way New York City is less friendly than somewhere in the middle of Tennessee. The question is, do I want to live in the middle of Tennessee? Personally, I wouldn't. So Dublin versus New York, for example, much better comparison and much nicer.
Speaking about like cutting throats, as you mentioned, like I think that one of the small parts, but it's very visible. It's like that police on the streets of Dublin on Ireland, they don't use weapon like at all. They don't carry guns. And this is the big difference, I think, versus the US. So the law enforcement on the streets is much more visible in the US versus Ireland.
I'm not anti-law enforcement, but I will say that in the United States, it is harder. Listen, I'm not the side of guys looting Apple stores. Obviously, it's gotten worse since I left over a decade ago. I'm not on their side either. But I always felt that the police, just with everyday law-abiding citizens, used to be more heavy-handed. Maybe that's changed, but it felt like you got people who had some problems to join the police force. Whereas you go to where you are in Singapore, the enforcement of the stuff that people kind of, they're fining you for drinking water on the subway. The way they ask you not to drink the water is like the nicest thing you've ever heard in your entire. It's like a back massage the way they ask you generally. And I think Ireland is not that much different. I mean, if you go to the Gardaí, the police station, and I remember 15 years ago, I first came here. I dated a woman who lived here, but she was an immigrant and she had to go there to renew stuff. They were so accommodating and so nice. And now 15 years later, that hasn't changed. And so you don't see that many police, by the way. I mean, go to some cities in the US, they are under siege. Now, there's a couple incidents in Dublin on the north side of town where there were some incidents. And no doubt you have a population that, because Ireland is by some metrics the wealthiest country in the world now in terms of income, you have, a lot of foreign workers. There's just not enough people to do jobs. And so you have this large foreign population. Some of those folks are from the European Union. They're allowed to move here, kind of like moving from California to Texas. Others are not. And so, there have been some incidents. I think if you look at the statistics, it's still much less than the United States and even much less than a place like Canada. So overall, I think there's a greater sense of harmony. The crime rates are lower.
Actually, if you don't want to depend at all on a specific country and you want to choose where to live while working remotely, consider starting a YouTube channel. I'll be hosting an online 3-day live workshop, YouTube Fast Track to Views and Passive Income, which was previously paid, but this time I've decided to give more people the opportunity to participate by making it free. So your results from participating: you will discover your unique niche along with its profit potential. And remember, not all niches are equal. You will learn techniques to generate an endless stream of creative ideas. You will determine the fastest way to get your first 1,000 subscribers. Doesn't matter what niche you are in. Important one, you will overcome fears like being camera shy or fearing judgment from others, and you finally make your first video during this workshop. And the most important one, you will learn how to outplay the YouTube algorithm to generate a large number of views for every video, even with a small number of subscribers. So I've put together the strategies that worked for me and many others. So basically it's a 3-day online workshop, and if it resonates with you, click on the link in description and book your seat right away. How long ago you left the US and why you left, if I may ask?
There were a number of reasons. The general culture in the US, whatever it may apply to, whether it's, I never had any problems with the police, but, once or twice you get pulled over, you wouldn't get a ticket. They'd scream and yell at you, just tell me I'm the sergeant and I'm the best and I'm right and you're wrong and I'll let you go. Just that kind of thing. And then you kind of feel like, is that how the IRS works? I remember the California Franchise Tax Board. I lived there for 6 months. They did stuff. Every lawyer's like, they're not even allowed to do that, but they did it. They got away with it. I just said, that's the culture. And that scares me. And I combined that with growing up with my father would tell us, he would bring stuff home from the Wall Street Journal. Oh, Singapore is the freest economy. Look at what they're doing over there. And he would talk about all the ways that the US was declining. He would show us places like Singapore that were doing good stuff, New Zealand, Chile. This is back in the 90s. And he said, you don't have to stay in the country. And eventually I cashed in that chip and I said, okay, I'm not going to stay in the country because I just don't agree with the culture in the US. I think that it's going the wrong direction. I, as a libertarian, don't agree geopolitically. And there's kind of an embarrassment when you say, are you an American? I don't want to be an American. I don't want to show a US passport. I think that also is going to have long-term issues for business. I mean, I know Americans who are in business in Asia. They have a much harder time than I would in their position. Combined with all the tax reporting, not the payment of taxes. I legally paid, if not very little, zero tax in all the years that I was out. And I think with a few adjustments, I could have kept it at zero. But it's just the reporting infrastructure. And then just, again, the culture of like, yeah, you owe us because you were born here. It's like, but if I was born 50 miles to the north, I'd be Canadian. Like, that's kind of the joke of it. And I guess on top of it, way back in the day, I don't know, I'm sure it'd be easier now. But, I just felt like the women that I would meet in Asia, in Latin America, even in Western Europe, were much more open to a 24-year-old entrepreneur. They didn't find that to be weird the way people in the United States does. And listen, I mean, if, dating leggy Moldovans and, Colombians and everybody else along the way before getting married, I think that probably beats Cleveland, Ohio. So a lot of reasons, not nearly as many of them financial as you would think. If you look at the real reason that I left the US and the real reason I gave up the citizenship is I felt that would bring greater happiness. Part of the equation could have been financial, like, hey, more money equals more happiness, but we know I'd limited sums of money. And I think I reached the number. I said, okay, that's the number, set it aside, never be poor, handle that as kind of a more mature portfolio. And going forward, what are you going to do to focus on impact, focus on helping other people, and focus on happiness? I just think that has to be part of the equation.
Do you remember when you decided actually to give up your American passport? When was this moment?
It was November, December 2017. I first told my father, one of the articles he brought home in the 90s was, it says here in the Wall Street Journal, they just increased something called the foreign earned income exclusion. And maybe it was like $65,000 back then. And that's, if you're not an American, if you don't live overseas, that's the amount of money that you can earn from like a salary, earned income, and you can just exclude from your income tax return. So now it's like $124,000. And so you can, like, whether you're an employee or whether you are like me and you employed yourself through a foreign company, if you structure it properly, you can basically pay zero tax on that amount. At like 13 or 14 years old, I said, well, wait a second, why do I have to pay taxes if I don't live in the country? That's insulting. He said, well, that's what it is. You can make 65 grand. And I'm like, Dad, my goal in life is not to make 65 grand. My father was a successful guy. I'm like, Dad, like my goal is to make more than 65 grand in 1997 dollars. And he's like, well, that's what it is. I remember thinking, like, well, what do I have to do? He's like, it says here you can give up your citizenship. I'm like, maybe I'll do that. And so that was kind of the first moment. I just think that the moment I started traveling, there's something, I don't know what it is. I'm sure a lot of Americans don't have this. I just said to myself, like, I don't want to be American. I don't believe it's my culture. I don't believe I fit in. I believe I get along with people better in other places. Not every other place. I believe that, you know, what I do, there's a greater acceptance. I agree with the geopolitics. I have been thinking about it for about 5 years. And I just think that I'm not anti-Trump. I'm not pro everything Trump ever does. But the stuff he talked about, I remember sitting watching his inauguration in Malaysia. It just made me think, like, this guy is going to maybe he's going to make life a little easier for people in the US, but he's going to make life harder for me because he doesn't like people like me who live outside of the country. He thinks it's the greatest country in the world and we should all be there or else we're disposable. And he ultimately, you know, there was some stuff that was done, you know, after I left that I just think that demonstrated that. I think it's dangerous. I think all the power the US has, I just said to myself, this is going the wrong direction. My father, what he also predicted in the 90s was eventually that things are going to get bad enough. People are just going to say, throw the bums out, elect a guy like Trump. Again, not saying I'm pro or anti-Trump, but they're going to say, you think some of these people in Congress have any intelligence at all? There's some people who are real idiots on both sides. And that's the result of people who are just fed up that their country is no longer the supreme leader in every way, that their wages aren't going up because people where you and I live in Asia are actually making more money and there's more competition. And heaven forbid, like 1990s United States, like they just wanted to keep people down. Like, hey, I don't care if you live in Malaysia in a hut. I need 3 cars and I need a 5-bedroom house and on one salary. It's not possible anymore. We're seeing an equilibrium. And so what happens when people don't get that stuff anymore? Like they go out and elect crazy people who do crazy stuff and come after the rich, and certainly after the rich who don't live in their own country. Because when you think your country's number one, someone who dares to live in like Malaysia, like that guy's a traitor. I don't care if you take everything he has. And I kind of thought it's not going to get that extreme, but it's just going to get worse. And for all the aforementioned reasons, I'm out.
I have a good buddy. He spent like a couple of years in Singapore. He's American. And he just moved last year. He moved to Ireland. He told me, dude, for me, it doesn't make sense where to live. I still pay American taxes every year, a lot of paperwork, like every year. And he also explained me how difficult the process of the paying taxes paperwork is. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, if they just made, like, listen, I personally, would I pay something to keep a U.S. passport? No, I wouldn't. I can see the logic. Like you see countries in Europe that people think are high tax, like Italy, for example, or Switzerland's maybe the better known. But Italy's a good example. It's a flat 100,000 euros. For 15 years, you pay 100,000 euros. They don't care how much money you make. So if you make 22 billion euros that year, you still pay 100,000 euros. If the US said, hey, listen, if you're an expat, if you're living overseas as a citizen, you should pay something. And hey, okay, tell us your bank accounts or just give us the names of the accounts so we can find them. Like there's something that would be more reasonable. But going and making it so a lot of banks around the world are scared to not take Americans having the SEC, which is the issue in Singapore. Singaporean banks will take Americans, but you can't make investments generally because the SEC rules, clash with the more laissez-faire Singapore rules. So like for the average person, I've seen people renounce. They're like, listen, if I had to pay something and it were easy and it didn't feel intrusive, I wouldn't give up my citizenship. But when it's like I have to file a 300-page tax return and I have to hire 7 different people and it costs me $50,000 to put it together, and I'm afraid I make one mistake and they come after me, like it's more of the fear from my perspective. I wouldn't live in the U.S. and I probably wouldn't want to be a U.S. citizen at this point, even if you paid me. That's my personal perspective. I'm entitled to it. I respect those who have a different perspective. That's just my perspective based on all the facts and not entirely based on financials. But the idea that like, if you have, 7 different sub-accounts in a Singapore account, that you've got to go and track every money movement throughout the entire year and convert your Sing dollars to US dollars at the quarterly treasury rate. Like, why? Why would you do that? And maybe the answer is a guy like Jim Rogers should have gone to Ireland first, gotten everyone Irish citizenship. Now, you're supposed to keep living in Ireland. That's a unique condition of theirs. How much that's enforced, I don't know. But like, get the Irish citizenship that's equal quality, then give up the U.S. citizenship, and then live in a place like Singapore. That's food for thought for someone who plans on making much more money more than 5 years from now. But for me, again, I could pay zero as a U.S. citizen living overseas, but there's so many restrictions, regulations, ways to move your money. You do stuff, you set up structures that no one else in the world understands. It's hard to audit when you have to audit it. Like, it serves to exist to serve a country you spend 0 days a year in by choice. There's my rant on it.
How does it feel for you going back to the US now? When you touch the ground?
I don't.
I don't know, JFK. You don't go?
I don't. I don't have a visa waiver program country passport. Right. I mean, like, certain people, they spend close to $1 million and they become a Maltese citizen. We help some of our clients do that. They become Maltese and then they renounce. And Malta, as part of the European Union, they can go to the US. I bet even a few of those guys get raised eyebrows because people in the U.S. at the border, they know how you get a Malta passport if you were born in the U.S. We have clients we help get citizenship by descent. Maybe you have an Italian grandfather or a great grandfather, and you become Italian, then you can go to the U.S. Maybe you live in a country, like if you live in Ireland for 5 years, you can become Irish. But for me, I don't have one of those passports. I've got a collection of lesser passports that kind of fits my narrative of, being left alone. If I live in those countries, I follow the laws. When I don't live in those countries, I follow basic laws, but they otherwise don't bother me. And so there's that. I don't know. I just feel like I would be extremely anxious going to the US for all the reasons. But I went as a citizen and I felt anxious as a citizen. I had a global entry card. I was a trusted traveler. It's not like, a guilty conscience. It's just an anxious, by the way, I'll be honest. I feel a little bit anxious going to Mexico. I feel that they have kind of the same approach. Where it's not that pleasant at times. So why would I do that to myself? To do what? To go and go to an overpriced beach hotel in Miami when you and I know all over Asia there's much better hotels with good service and at 1/5 the price. I just what's there for me?
Let's talk about your company, Nomad Capitalist, and the services that you do. What do you basically can help with if, let's say, someone from our audience approach you? So you help with passports, you help with residences. What else do you do?
There's a couple main areas. So the financial part would be, international multi-jurisdictional tax planning. If I leave the US, how do I get out of the US? And then how do I go and live in some other country? And how do those two work together? Especially if I'm an American, but increasingly other countries they really want to know what you're doing long term. We help with taxes. We help with bank accounts. We help with asset protection structures like trusts. We help with, if you're moving things like stocks, we don't pick stocks for you, but how do you structure that? Estate tax is an issue a lot of people we find aren't very aware of when investing internationally. Easy fixes has to be done. That's financial. Then there's the immigration side, residence, citizenship. We have unique residences that we have to literally go and knock on someone's door in some weird country because no one answers emails. And you've got to go there and figure it out. And we've done that multiple times. And we've gotten people citizenship that no one knows their role. Why do you think I don't talk about some of the citizenships? Not only do I think it's a good thing to keep it a little bit private just for your own purposes. Who knows what happens in the world? And then we help, we help with relocation. We help with, again, setting up investment structures. If you need to buy real estate, again, we're not real estate advisors, but we can help you. We've got a network of people. I think the biggest thing is kind of the understanding that we're talking about. When I talk to a tax guy, anything other than tax is uninteresting to him. It's not just
You move to Dubai, we get residence permit, low tax, even though actually there's a 9% tax on most companies, but we're not going to tell you that anymore. Everyone else has something to sell you. We have 4 Caribbean passports to choose from. Hey, actually, you know, your mother was Indonesian. You can get Indonesian citizenship. And since you only want to live in Malaysia, like you can just get an NM2H permit as an Indonesian, renounce your US. And since you never want to travel for the next 20 years of your life, like, why do you need this passport you can travel to Europe with? But like, they're not going to tell you to get that one because then they won't get a commission for selling you a $100,000 passport when you can get this one over here for free. And by the way, we had that exact same situation. The guy said, I still would feel more comfortable having this one. Okay, let's do that one. But you knew you had the chance to save $100,000. And I think that's what is so lacking in the industry.
So if someone reach out to you, like after watching this video, and they mentioned Max Chernov, are there any like special conditions that you can give them or something like for our audience?
I'll give you a special contact. So I respect your audience and I like that. I think you've got an audience of nice people, which again, optimize for kindness. Here's what I think people should do. If you're just exploring this and you're not at the level where you are quite ready, you're coming to our event. I think people should come to the event. And you know what? Come to the event and you get a lot of time talking to our team. We've got R&D people. We've got 6 R&D people who work here. I think many of them are coming to the event. We've got a strategy team that makes the plans. We've got people who execute plans. We've got people in our tax network. We've got lawyers from certain countries. Like, if you're convinced that, you know, one-stop shopping for lowering your taxes and getting a second passport and kind of building this global citizen nomad capitalist life is worth it, we'll put together something for you, Max. But I think for everybody else, you know, Nomad Capitalist Live is kind of our 4-day annual jamboree that is going to expose people to maybe more of the things they should be thinking about.
We'll leave the contact if you guys want the residency, the passport, the tax optimization. So we'll leave a content in description. And also the event that I'm actually speaking at this conference, at the events in September, basically in Kuala Lumpur. So we can meet with Andrew, we can meet, guys can meet with me. So we chat, we sit down and talk about things, life, business and stuff. So we'll also leave a link in description.
Thank you.
Let me show you some magic. If you click on this video, I will disappear and reappear again. Let's try it. 3, 2, 1.